Mike Dell's World, number 427 for the, what is it? The 21st of November, 2025.
When I was a young boy, there wasn't any internet. There wasn't any World Wide Web. There wasn't any egghead sending you texts saying those are the same thing. You don't have to say internet and World Wide Web. They're the same thing. There weren't any video games when I was a boy. Well, there was Pac-Man. That was a game, I guess. And Asteroids. Wizard of War. Scramble. Defender was a hell of a lot of fun. Those were what we called video games. Did I say we didn't have video games? Because that would have been a mistake. But there is one thing you have now that we didn't have when I was a boy that I wish we did.
Mike Dell's World. Yep, and we also had ham radio back in the day, although I didn't participate in ham radio. I did participate a little bit in CB radio. CB radio is not the same thing. It can be close in some regards, but CB radio is really limited to 40 independent channels, so exact frequencies, and you really don't deviate in between those frequencies. Starts in around 26 megahertz, 26.9 megahertz, up to about 27.5 in that vicinity. And if you think about it in meters, and that's the wavelength of the radio wave, it's 11 meters. And ham radio is a lot deeper than that. Ham radio, first off, has a lot of traditions when it comes to, just how people communicate via ham radio. But that's where it all kind of diverges. There's UHF. There's even some higher frequencies than UHF, ultra high frequency. But the most commonly used bands are in the UHF and VHF and HF. So I'll go through some of those. Like I said, CB would be considered 11 meters. In fact, CB radio was a ham radio band when it first started, and then the FCC and other places around the world decided that they should have a citizens band where people can talk with, well, at first you needed a license, but it wasn't hard to get one. Getting a ham radio license is a little more difficult, although nowadays it's not too bad. But the most commonly used bands for VHF, UHF would be, 23 centimeters. Nobody even calls it that. We call it 1200 megahertz, but it's between 1240 and 1300 megahertz. And not very many people use that. It's, usually used for linking things or talking to satellites, which you can do on ham radio. The next band that I don't know anybody that uses it. We used to have a repeater around here on it, but 900 megahertz or 33 centimeters. It's 902 to 928 megahertz, mostly FM, but there is some other modes on it. I guess I'll explain the modes a little bit. How about that? FM, frequency modulation. That's what you listen on your FM radio. And it's usually pretty clear and more high fidelity, although not as good as this podcast, but pretty high fidelity, not a lot of static, not a lot of interference. FM does have what's called the capture effect, meaning if you're listening to two people talking on FM and one's stronger than the other, you're only going to hear the one that's strongest, and you're not going to hear anything from the one that's not strongest. They don't mix well. Then there's AM, amplitude modulation, which is kind of the opposite. That's what airplanes use because of this effect. When two people are talking, you might hear both of them, or you can hear at least the fact that somebody else is talking at the same time. So that helps. And it isn't affected by the Doppler effect. And what the Doppler effect is, if you're moving, and especially moving rather fast, FM might get a little bit of weird warbly effect because you're moving, where AM doesn't matter. So that's why an airliner going 500 miles an hour can talk to a tower sitting still, or an air traffic control facility, and the communication is pretty clear. And it goes for a long ways because they're usually up in the 20s and 30s and 40,000 feet range. So, the higher the better. It's all kind of line of sight. And same thing with UHF, VHF, FM, and whatever other mode. That's more or less line of sight. So, the two antennas can see each other. Now we get into the more popular band of 70 centimeters, or 440 is what a lot of people call it. That is 420 to 450 megahertz. And that's mostly FM, mostly repeaters. And what a repeater is you talk into it on an input frequency, and it repeats it out on an output frequency, usually at a high level, or on a building, on a mountain, whatever. And then when you unkey, somebody else can key up, talk to that repeater, and you hear it. So it takes, these little handheld radios and makes it so that it goes a lot further. That's what's known as a repeater. And then, like I said, the 70 centimeter band is fairly popular. Not as popular, but still somewhat popular, is the, we call it 220, but it's 1.25 meters. That's the 222 to 225 megahertz band. And that's the same thing. It's mostly FM, repeaters and simplex. Simplex just means you're talking directly to somebody. Repeaters, you're talking through a repeater station, and some satellite work on that band. Same thing with the 440 band, 70 centimeters. A lot of satellite work there, and there are some ham satellites. And the most popular band of all time on ham radio is 2 meters, and that is 144 to 148 megahertz, at least here in the U.S. Other countries, it might go 144 to 146, rather than all the way up to 148. And that's VHF high band is another name for it. And that is probably the most ubiquitous ham band. You come into the ham radio license level of technician. That's usually the first level that people come in at. It used to be one called novice, and novices couldn't use 2 meters, but technicians could. Well, they've done away with the novice license altogether. There might be a few left. They're grandfathered in, but they don't get 2 meters. They get 220, 222 to 225. They don't get 2 meters or 440. But like I said, it's the most popular. The radios are cheap. I mean, you can get a Bofang, a Chinese little radio from Amazon. I think you can get one for under $60, and puts out a couple of watts, and you can program it for repeaters, and talk all over town with it. And that's about it for these VHF, UHF frequencies. It's mostly line of sight. Now there is some propagation. Propagation just means you can talk longer distances depending on atmospheric conditions. Being here next to the Great Lakes, we get one called tropospheric ducting. It sounds geeky, but basically what can happen is, right now the lake is very warm, the air is very cool, and the troposphere can get confused and get a little bit of a temperature inversion going, and that sometimes carries these UHF, VHF frequencies longer distances. I remember one time I was out fishing with a buddy of mine, and we were out on a lake and happened to have a 2 meter radio, handy in the boat, and we turned on the 2-meter radio while we were trolling and heard a bunch of people talking on a frequency that we usually don't hear a lot of people talking on. And come to find out, they were in Oklahoma. Here we are in Michigan. That is extremely long propagation for 2 meters. But it was kind of neat. It came and, it comes and goes, kind of fades in, fades out. But we had a fairly good conversation with a couple of people in Oklahoma on 2 meters. That is very rare, or at least rare that there's people on when that's happening. I think what happens sometimes is just nobody's talking, so nobody knows that duct opened. And that happens on some of the lower bands. As you get lower, the distances can get longer. And, in frequency, lower in frequency and higher in the number of meters. The wavelengths get bigger, the frequencies get smaller. Another one that is somewhat popular, but definitely not as popular as 2 meter, and it's considered the VHF low band. And that is 50 to 54 megahertz or 6 meters. 6 meters does have a mix of sideband, AM, FM, repeaters, kind of has the gamut of stuff. A lot of hams call it the magic band. The openings on that, propagation-wise, are a little more often and can consist of different kinds of propagation, not just like tropospheric ducting or ionospheric, propagation that mostly is what is kind of the thing. But, 6 meters can be pretty active, but it's not highly used. Most HF radios come with 6 meters included, but you got to have a different antenna. And, again, it's not highly used, but, kind of neat band. First of the HF or high frequency bands, and I know that makes no sense. High frequency is lower than very high frequency VHF or ultra high frequency UHF. HF is anything below 30 megahertz, and the first band in there is 10 meters. 10 meters is 28 megahertz to 29.7 megahertz. And notice that 11 meters, which was CB, is 26.27. And then there's another one, 12 meters, which I don't know anybody that uses 12 meters, but that's at 24 megahertz. So, 10 meters is just above what the typical CB band is. And that one, when it's open, is very active and very long distance. Not always long distance, but pretty long distance. I remember when I first got licensed, I got licensed as a novice ham radio operator, and one of the bands we could use was 10 meters on voice. You could use Morse code on other bands, otherwise known as CW. But this was the lowest frequency that we could use voice on, and also, allowed you to talk long distances. We call it DX for, talking to somebody outside the U.S., or outside your country. That's DX. But that was the lowest frequency that a novice operator or a technician operator can use on voice. And I just got licensed. This was, I think, back in 1987 or 88, something like that. Boy, I've been at this a while. And the cool thing was you could modify a CB radio to transmit on 28 megahertz instead of 27, and that was totally legal. As a ham radio operator, you're allowed to modify your radio as long as it stays in technical specifications. Your bandwidth is not too wide and you're not splattering frequencies all over the place, and you stay within the power limit. On 10 meters for novices, it was 200 watts as opposed to 4 watts for a CB or 12 sideband. But that's a whole nother ball of worms. I don't want to get too technical, but I had an old CB radio that I put a different crystal in and modified it so that it would talk on 28 megahertz. And for about 2 weeks, I would drive to work. I had, I was in the Air Force, and I would live 10 miles away from the base. So I had this thing in my truck, and I could get on there. And I got on there, and I talked to a guy in Japan. His call sign was, what is it? Oh, man, JO4HQQ, I think was his call. Now I don't remember exactly, but he was my first official ham radio contact. And I talked to him every day on my way to work for about 2 weeks. The conditions were such, and then, the conditions went bad and whatever. But I used to, it was JO1HQQ. There we go. It just popped back in my head. And at that time, my call sign was KB7FGT, fun and good times. But anyway, I quickly upgraded to technician. And when I got my novice license back then, only 2 general class operators could give you your novice license test. It didn't have to be a volunteer examiner or the FCC to give you the test. Just any 2 generals could sign you off on the test, and you had to pass a 5-word per minute code, most Morse code check, and you had to pass a written test, which was, 30 questions about rules and regulations, whatnot. Wasn't that hard. It's novice, it's just a learning permit, basically. But anyway, I upgraded to my technician so then I could get on 2 meters, and that was kind of the thing. Where I was in Idaho, we had mountaintop repeaters, and we could talk for miles and miles and miles with a HT or a walkie-talkie style little radio, and that was a lot of fun. And I met a lot of people and had have a lot of friends to this day that I used to talk to on 2 meters there in Idaho off of the mountaintop repeaters. But on 10 meters, I used to use that. We'd get on 10 meters. I'd go, climb. We had a couple of mountaintop parking spots, kind of overlooks or whatever. And I'd go up there and set up my radio, my bigger antenna. And I'd sit there and talk, for 2 or 3 hours with people all over the country, all over the world on 10 meters. It was pretty cool, but that was the top of the sunspot cycle. And, again, odd conditions. That was, like I said, in the late 80s, early 90s. And right now we're at the peak of another sunspot cycle. And those bands are wide open right now. So kind of cool. 12 meters, that's that one I was telling you, that's just below where the CB frequencies are, and that's around 24 megahertz. It's a kind of a weird cutout of bands. It's 24.89 to 24.99, so it's not very much bandwidth, but you can use 12 meters to talk. I've never heard anybody on there, and I've never used it myself. One of the legacy bands, the older bands that people use a lot, it's especially popular in Europe and on the east coast of the U.S. I don't know, I guess worldwide too, probably, but the most usage I hear is East Coast U.S. and Europe. But it's 15 meters, and that's 21 megahertz to 21.45 megahertz. So, 450 kilohertz worth of bandwidth there, and that can get busy. And then there's 17 meters, and that's what's known as a work band. Work was the World Amateur Radio Conference, carved out this little frequency range in the 17 meter band at 18.68 to 18.168. So it's a pretty small band. It's only 100 kilohertz wide, but people get on voice and they use digital modes there. And I'll explain digital modes when I get through the the bands here. 20 meters, that's also a legacy band, and that's probably the most busy HF band. And that one, you can talk all over the world on, or, it's mostly, kind of worldwide or cross country. Like the group I belong to has a net, which is a scheduled time that we all get together on a particular frequency. And we have a net on 20 meters on Sunday mornings. And I can hear the people in California, Arizona, Texas, that are on this group, but I really can't, and maybe Florida from here in Michigan, but I can't really hear Ohio or other people in Michigan. So it's a longer skip zone, longer propagation. It's never really short range unless we're really close. And then of course it's called ground wave, and I can hear somebody that's really close. Like, when my dad used to get on it from 8 miles away, I could hear him, but I couldn't hear the guy 20 miles away from me. It was, but I could hear the people in California, and every once in a while we have a friend of ours in Australia that gets on that, and we can hear him. So that's kind of interesting. There's another band, another Wark band, 30 meters, and that's at 10.1 to 10.15 megahertz. So it's only 50 kilohertz wide, and it's Morse code and digital modes only. There's no voice on 30 meters, so you can't talk. You can do Morse code or some of the digital modes. 40 meters is another legacy one, and we do another net on 40 meters that pretty much covers the eastern half of the United States, and that's actually a really good band certain times of the day, usually mornings or evenings, not so much in the middle of the day. It all depends on, like I said, conditions of the atmosphere, and it not always the same every day, but we have a pretty good luck hearing pretty much anybody in the eastern half of the U.S. and of course Canada. Don't have any check-ins on that one from Canada usually, but that one is a pretty popular band, and if you're going to hear some activity, it's either going to be on 20 or 40 meters most of the time during the day. Then there's 60 meters, and 60 meters is weird, and nobody really uses it in the contiguous 48 states, but most of it happens in Alaska and Hawaii and other parts of the world. But this is channelized. There's actually 5 channels, and you have to stay right on those channels. It's just like CB, and it's only upper sideband phone or CW, which is Morse code, and you can only run 100 watts. As a general class or higher licensee, you can run 1,500 watts on most of the bands, but on 60 meters you can only run 100 watts, and they're in a 5 megahertz channel segment. So that's around 5,300 kilohertz or 5.3 megahertz up to 5.4. And like I said, it's in 500 kilohertz wide channel or 5 megahertz channels. So kind of an interesting, weird band that not a lot of people use. 80 meters, or sometimes called 75 meters, because it applies, it's between 75 and 80 meters wavelength. That is probably one of the more popular bands in the evenings and in the mornings. And there's, it's between 3.5 and 4 megahertz. And I don't know if you can hear the dog groaning in the background. He's probably ready to go in and go to bed. I'm recording this the night before, so just those of you keeping score. But anyway, 80 meters is good. We have a local net here in Traverse City called the Amateur Radio Social Hour, which is 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings, and we're on 3935 or 3.95 megahertz. No, 3935. There we go. 3.935 megahertz or 3935 kilohertz, and it's in lower sideband. So if you have a shortwave radio that does sideband, you can hear that. You can also find an SDR. Look up Kiwi SDR, and there's a couple of them here locally in Empire, Michigan. And you can tune in to 3935 and listen to the Amateur Radio Social Hour. I get on that one almost every Sunday, and that covers, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, the UP. We get check-ins from Ontario. We got one of the guys that lives up on St. Joseph Island, up by Sugar Island, in the UP area in Ontario. So he gets on there pretty much every week as well. But that's the most likely, if you're going to hear me on the radio, that's the most likely place to hear me on the radio is 3935 at 9 a.m. Eastern time here in Michigan. But, if you're out of the area, you can get on the Empire SDR. KF8KK is the Kiwi SDR, but that's on Sunday mornings. And then there's another band a little bit lower than that is used quite a bit, but it requires a really long antenna because it's 160 meters, and that's at 1.8 to 2 megahertz, and that is the lowest HF band, high frequency band. And there are bands lower than that is usually experimental stuff and whatever. But if you think about 160 meters is 1.8 megahertz or 1800 kilohertz, that's just above the AM broadcast band. So it has similar propagation to like your AM radio station. So, at night it goes a long way, and during the day it doesn't go so far. So, that's it. But, you get on the AM broadcast band at night, you can hear stuff from all over the place, listening. And that's what 160 meters is. I don't play on that one very often. Every once in a while I will. But anyway, that's the difference between CB and ham radio or family radio service or any of the other kind of radio service. The hams have a lot more variety of frequencies, propagations, modes, all that. And I was talking about the digital modes, and there's a mode that's kind of taking over a lot of the ham radio world. It's, I forget what it's called. Benny, would you just quiet down? I don't know if you heard him in the background, but he's whining at me because he wants to go in the house, and, he's got to wait. Poor dog. Anyway, but yeah, there's modes that are completely automated digital modes, and there's no actual communications going on. But a lot of people are using it. So, you could just sit here and click and make contacts all over the world, but you're not actually communicating anything. I'm blanking on what it's called. Here, let me bring up an SDR. Let's see if I can get the SDR going here. I don't know if you won't be able to. Oops. You can hear some stuff. Let's find one of the digits. Okay, FT8 is one of them. So listen to this. Listen to this noise. Okay, I'm not going to bore you with that, but listen to that noise. And what it is a bunch of ham radio transmitters transmitting all at the same time. And then, so, like right now I could click on something if I was running it. I'm not running it, but I'm just listening to it on the software-defined radio, the SDR. And it's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ham radio operators just clicking a thing. And, make contact with this one. And boom, it automatically gives the exchange. And all of a sudden, boom, you've got a contact from, Lower Slobovia or wherever. And, to me, it's kind of like, watching paint dry with an annoying noise in the background. So I'm not a fan. There are other digital modes where it's actually keyboard to keyboard. Packet radio was the first one, and RTTY, which is radio teletype. That's another kind of digital mode. One that I really liked and not very many people do anymore is PSK31. And it's a very slow digital mode, but think of it like texting back and forth with somebody, but via the ham radio. And I can blame my ability to type on a keyboard from packet radio. Back in the day, I used to do a lot of packet radio out west, and I had what we called a VT52 terminal, and basically it was a computer terminal that used to be used to connect to a mainframe computer that we repurposed through what's called a TNC, a terminal node controller, which is basically a modem that sent 1200 baud packet signals through VHF. And then there was nodes that would repeat that. And there was quite a network all over the country of these nodes. And if you were patient and connected to this node, then connected to the next node and connected to the next node and whatever, you could get all the way across the country with a rather slow 1200 baud. And if you think of that in internet speed, 1200 baud is painfully slow. I think if we used a baud number for what your normal internet connection would be, that would be somewhere in the 5 to 7 million baud is what we're doing now with internet connections. So this was painfully slow, and it was also half duplex, they call it. So you type, send, and then the packet would go to one node, then the packet would go to the next node, and the packet would go to the next node, the packet node, so it wasn't real time in any way. But I used to be able to connect to my dad here in Michigan when I'm out in Boise, Idaho, and I used to connect to my dad on packet, and I'd send, a text, what's essentially a text message, and then he would get it probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, and he would answer it and send it back to me, and then it would go through all the, the different nodes all the way across the country. And, we could have a keyboard to keyboard conversation that, nowadays you could do in, 10 minutes on a cell phone. It took, 2 or 3 hours to get 3 or 4 messages across the country. It's kind of cool. Then they had these bulletin board systems where you could log into the bulletin board, write a longer message, and send it sort of like email. And this was before email existed. And I could send a bulletin board message to my dad's local bulletin board here in Traverse City from my local bulletin board in Idaho. And, it might take a day to get there, but it would get there. And then he could reply, and then he would send it back. So, I did email before email was cool via ham radio. And, then there was these HF gateways where, you could jump across long places, on a bulletin board system that would shoot it across the country on 20 meters or 10 meters. So, the hams kind of got email sort of figured out before email was a thing. And same thing with cellular. These VHF, UHF repeaters was kind of the basis of cellular telephones. You'd have a repeater near you, and then the repeater was connected to another repeater somewhere distant. And, that was a thing. And nowadays you got more power in your pocket on your iPhone than any of this ham radio stuff, but it's still fun to play with the old technology. So anyway, boy, I hope I didn't bore you to death with a lot of geeky details, but it's it's been a real ride for me. I've met many good friends via ham radio. Same thing with aviation, and some of them crisscross. I got some friends that are aviators and ham radio operators, and that's kind of cool. But, it's a big fraternity, I guess, is the right way to put it. And, sometimes it's just fun to get on and call CQ. CQ means, Hey, I'm here. I want to talk to somebody, and you call CQ and somebody answers you and you have a nice conversation with them and meet them, from could be across town, could be across the country, could be across the world. So ham radio is a pretty interesting hobby. And nowadays you can get in without learning Morse code. They've done away with all the code requirements, although some people use Morse code. I have a code key here, and periodically I do get on Morse code a little bit just to keep my skills up. But you don't have to learn that anymore. So there's 3 levels of ham radio license here in the U.S. There's the technician class, which is the entry level, and you have to pass a test. You find a VE session, a volunteer examiner session near you, and you sign up and go pay the license fee. I think it's $40 or $50, something like that, and take the FCC test. And if you pass the test, they issue a call sign and you're a ham. And then there's the next level is the general class, and that gives you all of the bands, but you don't get all of the frequencies in all of the bands. Because there's a little carve out for the next higher license, but not much. I mean, it's not like a huge difference. General class license is totally adequate for most people that want to play around on the high frequency or HF bands and talk around the world. If you just want to talk, with a handy talkie around town or around the state on repeaters and whatnot, the technician class license. And then there's the extra class, and that's what I am. I've had my extra now for 25 years, and that just means I'm able to operate on all frequencies of all bands, and I have that privilege. I can also become a volunteer examiner. Well, that's one of the things. You have to be an extra class to give the extra class test. And so I have done that. I am a registered volunteer examiner with the American Radio Relay League and the W5YI group, which is another licensure group. So I'm qualified for both of those, and every once in a while I'll do a test session with one of the VE groups around here, and I haven't done one in a while, but they do them periodically, and now you can do them online. There's actually online testing where you can join a volunteer examiner test session via Zoom. So yeah, there's some weird rules. You gotta, you can't go off. You can't turn your camera off, and the test itself actually locks you out of getting into any other device nearby, and you have to have your camera on so that they can see that you're not looking up questions on your phone or a book or something nearby. But it can be done now online. Although I'd recommend going to a session because you'll meet people and it's kind of cool. But, yeah, that's ham radio. And again, like I said, I hope I didn't bore you with too much technical stuff, but I had a lot to say about it, I guess, because, it's been a big part of my life. And, I got my dad into it. And before he died, he was really into it. He got his extra class license before I did. But like I said, we had a good time with it all along. And like I said, I have some lifelong friends because of ham radio. Those of you that know about podcasting, the inventor of podcasting, Adam Curry, is a ham radio operator. And I think it's K5ACC or something like that. Anyway, he's a ham radio operator. My current call sign is K8LMJ. It used to be N7LMJ, but when I moved to Michigan and after several years, I changed it to 8 because the call sign number, it kind of gives you the area of where you're at. It's not required that you change it to the correct area, but I did. So anyway, everybody have a good rest of the day. I'll get this one out so it goes out first thing in the morning since it's a longer one. And I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about tomorrow, but I'll be here. Catch me later.